The ICU of St. Mary's General Hospital in Boston never truly slept. Machines beeped in steady rhythms, nurses moved quietly through dimly lit corridors, and the air always carried that sharp antiseptic smell that somehow made everything feel both sterile and heavy at the same time. It was a place where hope and grief lived side by side, sometimes in the same breath. Ethan Cole was 27 years old, and he had not slept in 3 days. He sat in the pale blue waiting room chair, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His dark blonde hair was a mess, his grey t-shirt wrinkled beyond saving, and his eyes, those blue eyes that his wife had always said looked like a stormy ocean, were completely hollow. His wife, Lily Cole, was 25. She had been admitted to St. Mary's 6 days ago, after collapsing at the grocery store. What the paramedics initially called severe dehydration had turned into something far more terrifying: acute liver failure. The doctors had been honest with Ethan from the beginning, maybe too honest. The words critical condition, deteriorating rapidly, and preparing for the worst had been used so many times that they had stopped feeling like words altogether and started feeling like punches landing in the same bruised spot over and over again. Lily and Ethan had been married for only 14 months. They had met in college, fallen in love over bad coffee and late-night study sessions, and gotten married in a small outdoor ceremony with wildflowers and fairy lights. They had plans: a house, maybe a dog, travel, children someday. They had so many plans. And now Ethan sat in this waiting room, watching the clock on the wall tick forward while his entire world lay somewhere behind those double doors, fighting to stay alive. It was on the 4th morning that he first met Dr. Olivia Hayes. She walked into the waiting room at 6:45 in the morning, still in her white coat, a stethoscope hanging around her neck, a coffee cup in one hand and a tablet in the other. She was 29 with sharp green eyes, light brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the kind of focused expression that people who carry heavy responsibilities tend to wear permanently. She had just come off a 14-hour shift and was supposed to be heading home. Instead, she stopped in front of Ethan. "You're Lily Cole's husband," she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan looked up slowly. "Yeah?" "I'm Dr. Hayes. I've been part of your wife's care team since yesterday evening." She paused, glancing briefly at the empty coffee cup in the trash beside him, the untouched sandwich from the hospital cafeteria, still in its plastic wrap on the seat next to him. "When did you last eat something?" Ethan blinked. Of all the things a doctor had said to him in the past week, no one had asked him that. I'm not sure." Olivia set her own coffee down on the side table, pulled the chair across from him and sat down, not in a rushed, clinical way. She sat down like she had time, like she was choosing to be there. "I want to talk to you about Lily," she said, her voice steady but not cold. "The real version, not the version wrapped in medical jargon that leaves you more confused than when you walked in." Ethan straightened. "Okay." She told him everything. The liver function numbers, what they meant, where they were trending, the treatment adjustments the team had made overnight. The small, and she emphasized the word small carefully, honestly, signs of stabilization in the last few hours. She didn't give him false hope, but she also didn't leave him in darkness. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Is she going to make it?" he asked. Olivia looked at him directly. "I don't know. I wish I could tell you something different, but I don't know yet. What I can tell you is that we are not giving up on her, and I need you to not give up either, because she is going to need you on the other side of this, whatever that looks like." Ethan's jaw tightened. He nodded once and looked away, and Olivia saw his eyes go glassy before he blinked it back. She stood up, picked up her coffee cup, and then paused. "Eat the sandwich, Ethan, please." He almost laughed. It was the closest thing to a laugh he had managed in days. 3 days later, Lily's condition collapsed. It happened fast, the way catastrophic things always seem to, even when you've been warned they might be coming. Her blood pressure dropped sharply overnight. Her liver numbers plummeted. By 5 in the morning, the ICU team had moved her to a critical intervention bay, and the attending physician had quietly asked Ethan to come in. He stood at her bedside for the first time since her admission. The nurses had made an exception. She looked so small. Lily, who had always laughed so loudly and danced in the kitchen and argued passionately about the best hiking trails in Vermont, looked like she was barely there. Tubes and wires everywhere. Her face pale and still. Ethan held her hand and said her name, and promised her things he didn't know if he could keep. At 7 in the morning, the attending physician sat him down and used the words that Ethan had been dreading since day one. "We are not optimistic. You may want to call family." Ethan walked out of that room and stood in the hallway, and the walls felt like they were closing in. He pressed his back against the cold plaster and slid down until he was sitting on the floor. And he didn't care who saw, and he buried his face in his hands. He heard footsteps stop near him. He looked up and Olivia was there, still in her coat, clearly just arriving for her morning shift. She took one look at him and sat right down on that hallway floor beside him, white coat and all, without saying a single word. They sat like that for a while. Finally, Ethan said, "They told me to call family." "I heard," she said quietly. "I don't know how to do this." Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You don't have to know how. You just have to stay present. That's all she needs from you right now." "She's 25, he said, and his voice broke on the number, cracked right down the middle. "She's 25 years old." Olivia didn't say anything to that. There was nothing to say. She just stayed there, beside him on that floor, while the hospital moved around them. But Lily did not die that morning. By 9 o'clock, something shifted, imperceptibly at first, and then with a little more certainty. Her pressure stabilized. A specialist who had been called in the night before had recommended a last resort intervention that the team had initiated around 4 in the morning, and it was beginning, slowly, cautiously, to work. By noon, the attending physician found Ethan in the waiting room, and this time the words were different. "She's not out of the woods, not even close. But she is responding." Ethan pressed both hands over his face and exhaled the longest breath of his life. The next 2 weeks were a slow, grinding climb. There were setbacks. There were 2 nights where Ethan slept in the waiting room chair because he couldn't make himself leave. There were phone calls to Lily's parents in Vermont and his own mother in Portland, tearful and exhausting. There were moments where hope felt very far away, but Olivia was there, not always. She had other patients, other emergencies, other lives to fight for, but consistently, reliably present in a way that meant something. She gave Ethan real updates. She answered his questions without condescension. Once, she found him crying in the family room at midnight and brought him a cup of terrible vending machine tea and sat with him while he collected himself, and then very gently made him go home and sleep in an actual bed. "You cannot fall apart," she told him firmly. "Lily is going to need someone standing when she wakes up. That person has to be you." He went home that night. He came back the next morning. Lily Cole opened her eyes on a Tuesday. It was quiet, no dramatic moment, no sudden awakening. Ethan was sitting beside her bed, his head tipped back against the wall, eyes closed. When he felt her fingers move weakly against his hand, he was on his feet in an instant. Her eyes were open, barely, tired and confused and struggling to focus, but open. "Hey," he managed. Just that one word, and his voice shattered completely. Her lips moved. No sound came out, but he knew what she was saying. He knew her face better than his own. "Hey!" 3 days after Lily regained consciousness, Olivia stopped by her room during rounds. Lily was still weak, still had a long recovery ahead, still needed careful monitoring, but she was awake, aware and improving steadily. She was sitting up slightly in bed, Ethan beside her, their hands linked together on the blanket. Olivia reviewed her chart, checked her numbers, asked her a series of medical questions in that calm, professional way. And then Lily looked at her with those tired eyes and said, "Ethan told me about you, about everything you did." Olivia glanced briefly at Ethan. He looked away, a little embarrassed, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "I just did my job," Olivia said. "He said you sat on the floor with him," Lily said softly. "In the hallway. When they told him to call family." There was a pause. He needed someone to sit with him, Olivia said simply. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for keeping him standing. He would have fallen apart without someone holding him up. He always tries to be so strong." She squeezed Ethan's hand. "He's not very good at asking for help." Ethan cleared his throat. "I'm right here." Lily smiled, and it was the first real smile Ethan had seen on her face in almost a month, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. Olivia walked out of that room and stood in the corridor for a moment, letting out a slow breath. This was the part of the job no one talked about enough, not the saving, but the accompanying, sitting on cold hallway floors, answering questions at midnight, telling hard truths and staying in the room while they landed. Watching people carry more than any person should have to carry. She had chosen this profession at 22 years old, sitting in a hospital waiting room of her own, watching doctors move with quiet purpose through chaos, and thinking, "I want to be the person who makes this bearable." She still wanted that. Every single day. She took a breath, checked her pager, and walked on down the corridor, toward the next room, the next family, the next person sitting in a pale blue waiting room, chair with hollow eyes and clasped hands, waiting for someone to sit down across from them and tell them the real version. She was never late for that.